Thanks very much for inviting me. I don't think more than one or two of you have seen this paper. So it's with Ahu Gamici and Steve Laufer, co-authors. So I'll spend a little time on the introduction, even though I have a short period of time to present the paper. There's a fair number of results. But just because I want to locate this in a literature I tend to be a little bit critical of. And so it's the more macro matching literature. Starting off with the, I'm not critical of this paper, I love this paper, obviously, Postel-Vinay and Robin, in which they wrote down in a continuous time search model with bargaining. They considered the flow output equal to the product of the firm type and the worker type, A times P. And the implication of that model is there's no systematic sorting between workers and firms. All workers unambiguously prefer a better firm, for example. Since this time, with the work of Aboud et al., it's basically just analysis of variance kind of results that seem to indicate there wasn't much systematic sorting using their methodology. For some reason, the macro search people got intrigued and said how basically the misspecification of the econometric model was leading this result, and there really was systematic sorting. I thought they had a good model as it was, but they kept messing with it. So Hagedorn and all, they estimate non-parametrically a production technology with A and P that's not restricted to be this product form. And they have to make a bunch of assumptions to estimate that, some of which won't be consistent with what I'm going to present today. But basically, my point about all this stuff is that in all these models, A and P are considered to be time invariant. And the distribution of those characteristics, F and H, are considered to be primitives of the model. A paper I have with Joe Mullins generalized this a little bit to look at, to allow workers to make investments before entering the labor market. And there was a primitive distribution in that case, F naught here, and there was a matching distribution G. So these are models, because I'm not using worker firm matched data. The firms are considered homogeneous, so everything I'm going to be talking about today has worker types and match values. These are totally idiosyncratic to the worker firm match. They're not specific to occupations, industries, everything, just that firm. So we let people make investments, basically just a binary investment decision, go to college or not. And if you went to college, you could augment the A you had, the initial A, by just this multiplier H here. So if you didn't, it was a binary decision. If you didn't go to college, H was 1, so you had the initial endowment. If you went to college, it was shifted up your endowment by H. Now, since there's strong complementarities here, obviously, only the most able people go to college. There's a cost of going to college and so on, but the point is the decision rule to go to college was affected by all the labor market parameters. That means the entry distribution of worker types was not a primitive of the model. And for example, we explored, like in almost all my papers now, because I'm forced to by referees, had to put minimum wages in there. And minimum wages also affected college going decisions. So what we're going to do today, we're not going to, so this is not a, eventually we'd like to build a comprehensive model that has both pre and post-market investment. Today we're just going to be considering pre-market investment as given and as an indicator of your initial ability when you enter the market. But we're going to be allowing workers, workers and firms in a cooperative manner to be making investment decisions. In this case, because we're going to be able to be changing both A and theta, we'll no longer be thinking of those as primitives of the model, those distributions. They're going to be produced. There could be steady state distributions of these things, but they're not primitives because workers and firms are going to be acting on these initial distributions in some optimal way, in a cooperative way. This is all cooperative, this framework. So A and theta may change over time, and they generally will change over time over the course of a match. So we can't really talk about time invariant matching of types because these types are changing. This change, this stochastic process is partially endogenous also. So that's what we're going to be modeling. That's the main contribution. So there's been a couple of attempts to do things like this. So Etienne Vosmer has a nice paper in 2006. It's strictly theoretical, in which he allows these people to make general specific human capital decisions at the beginning of an employment spell, but they're all at the instant the employment spell starts, and it's all in terms of money investment. We think a big important part of this is time investment, and so we're introducing these things as time investment. We're not going to have as elegant solutions as he does, but we think it's a little bit more reasonable for empirical specification. Bagger et al. Allow for deterministic growth in a worker's ability. So that essentially means that when the workers are changing over time in some deterministic way, the firms they would be optimally matched with are changing also. Lentz and Roy is maybe the closest thing here. They have a more elegant solution in the sense they're going to allow for dynamic contracting. So they're going to allow firms to promise certain utility levels to workers. I just felt as an American that wasn't very realistic that they were doing that. So we're going to have less complete contracting environment, like is usually assumed when you actually take these things to data. They also had general and specific human capital is here, but it was just binary, those two things, and there was no depreciation. So this is a more elegant thing, but it's more of a calibration exercise and very restrictive in terms of the levels of human capital that you can have of either type.
How did it relate to Lavadon's paper on directed search?
Well, he's concentrating a lot on making ways, I recall that paper, is using wages as a way to discourage people from investing in an unknown way. That's not here at all. Okay, so there's no notion of this kind of moral hazard problem. But that's investing in search. That's investing in generating offers. You're not changing your productivities. So this is all about changing your productivities. So one thing about the minimum wages here, so I've done several things with minimum wages before. In the 2015 paper with Mullins, we could actually, that was the first time I'd estimated and looked at minimum wages in a model with heterogeneous types of worker types before they were all homogeneous. And then there's interesting results in terms of how minimum wages affect schooling decisions, basically. I won't have a lot of time to go into that, but we're going to also look at minimum wages in this case. And we know there's the old competitive literature by Becker and Mincer and so on about in a competitive labor market with general human capital investment, minimum wages put some bound on how much you can invest, right? Because they say you got a productivity of 5, you'd like to invest 2, but the minimum wage is 4, so you can only invest 1 unit. This lowers the profile, wage growth profile, and also lifetime welfare. So we're going to look at a model with search frictions and minimum wages. How does minimum wages affect training? How does it affect specific training? How does it affect general training? There's a few interesting results here that don't show up if you don't allow for these things to be endogenously changed, what I'm going to call A and theta. So A is the worker type, general ability. Theta is the match type. One thing you have to confront in these situations is we don't observe human capital. So it's like the ether. We just see certain phenomena. We say, oh, that's caused by human capital. That's caused by human capital. In this case, we have 2 sources of human capital, general and specific. It's always going to be hard to tease these things out. It's also hard to tease out what we mean by training. So in the NLSY 97, these are people who reported getting training at least once in the labor market career that we have, which may span on average 5 or 6 years. First of all, I should say that the people we're going to consider are all at least high school. This model can't explain at all what happens to high school dropouts. Nobody wants to invest in them. They have terrible labor market careers. So this is restricted to people who finish high school, some college, and college or more. People got training at least once in their labor market history that we observe, 15%. Who got training at the start of a job spell, 6%. So not all training takes place at the beginning of a job spell. It can take place in the middle of it. That might be associated with changing your job task or something, right? Or getting a promotion, whatever. So the point is that the high school graduates are more likely to report some training. And the college graduates are less likely to get training at the beginning of a career, a job spell, and more likely, so it could be associated with a promotion.
Sorry, Chris, when
Yeah.
you're saying that you're going to consider training at the beginning, you mean the beginning of the spell, not the beginning of the career?
I mean, during any point in time, you can be undergoing training, okay, at any point in the career, in my model, and in the data, clearly. In the data, clearly. So this might be the best correspondence between the data and the model. So yeah, it could begin at any point. It depends on a bunch of stochastic events. Some are endogenous, some are exogenous. By type of training, so these are small numbers. So one point I want to make before I forget is that when you're asking people to report training, I would say we're always getting training constantly in some form, right? Whenever we're interacting with a conference, we're learning something, we're figuring something out. So it's hard to tell when people are asked to report training. Is it just formal training? What if a colleague just spent a day with me showing me how to use some software? Do they count that as training? So there's lots of activities. So we're going to basically argue, and it's going to be imposed in the model. This is a systematically undercount of the amount of training you get. So we're going to basically blow up these training spells by some kind of measurement error function. So we're not going to be able to distinguish these types of training. And when you're dealing with something so conceptually, stylized, like totally general and totally match-specific human capital, you can't ask questions like that, right? So you're trying to infer all these things.
So there's going to be an equilibrium outcome of who's going to pay for the training?
Yeah, it's all going to be cooperative. They're going to share the cost.
So then there's commitment.
No, it's all spot. I mean, there's a flow contract at any point in time. It's going to specify your wage, the flow rate of training and general ability, and the flow rate of training and specific ability. Either one of those could be 0 if you're not undergoing training. Each one of those could be positive.
You can walk away?
You can walk away, yeah. But it'll never be optimal to do that.
Why not? Because
Well, you have match values, you go back to the unemployment state. If it was optimal to do this, there can be stochastic shocks. So one thing about this model is when I get into it, there's going to be like the standard thing to keep things stationary is going to be exogenous job terminations. On this model, there's also going to be endogenous job terminations. When your general ability or specific ability decline to a point where you're better off unemployed, but it's all cooperative. So you and the firm agree this match doesn't have any value anymore, and we just go our separate ways. So we're all expected wealth maximizers, the firm and the worker, right? So there's nobody getting screwed one way or the other by walking away. It's just not optimal to do so most of the time. So let me keep me a little bit informed of the time, maybe, Joel.
Well, now you've used 10 minutes.
Okay. So let me just get to the model, and I can backtrack on things if we have time. So we're in continuous time, and there are a grid of ability levels, M values, that are ordered, all positive. So we're going to use initial schooling, but just as an indicator of where the distribution that you're initially drawing from when you're starting your labor market career. So unlike the Flinn and Mullins paper. So we're just saying we're basically going to take this multinomial distribution. We don't want to estimate all the parameters associated with 20 points of support or something, whatever we have there. So we're going to basically impute probabilities to these different spells based on a log normal approximation. Okay? So there's going to be 2 parameters. So for this is a schooling level, there's 3. There's high school, some college, and college. So we're going to be estimating these parameters. So this is assumed common for all schooling types, but the mean varies by schooling types. And of course, we're going to actually estimate that this mu is higher the higher schooling level. But that's all we're saying, so that's not an endogenous part of the model. When a worker meets a firm at some rate lambda u, so we're going to have a general equilibrium version of this too, but these could be equilibrium rates or just partial equilibrium rates. That's a contact rate when you're unemployed. You draw from this other multinomial distribution, has cap k points of support. Once again, we're going to approximate the probabilities there using a log normal. We're going to say the prudential, and this is something that we tried to exploit, didn't work out empirically, but you're going to use the standard thing that the match quality, the productivity of the match is going to be the flow product of the match, the net product of the match is going to be the worker's type. I would be the level at which they're at. These are not individuals, this is the level at which you're at, right? And J, which one of these thetas it is, minus some cost zeta of, interpret this as a capital cost. You've got to rent capital. So we tried to use this. It made the model fit better to put this in. And we also tried to use it in a way to be able to estimate a matching function technology directly, but it doesn't work for a reason I'll show you later. So we're in continuous time, so what's the production function look like? So production functions are really just hazard rates. So this rate here is, so the rate at which you move up, so it's continuous time, so without really any loss of generality. It's going to be a random walk, basically an endogenous random walk, in which the rate at which you move up to the next, you're at level I right now in terms of your general ability level. So the rate at which you move up to I plus 1, the next level, is a function of where you currently are, so like a TFP parameter, and how much time you're investing. So in any moment in time, there's an instant, we're just going to say that's normalized to 1. You're going to spend part of that time working, could be all the time working, and then part of time investing in general human capital, part of time specific human capital. So we can see so this is the rate at which you're going to be moving up in terms of your general ability level. Here's the rate at which you're moving up in terms of match-specific quality. It's got the same form, same functional form, and is a function of this. These are flow time investment levels, right? So all Poisson processes. And they have a curvature parameter here, which we're going to estimate, which is going to be important. So these delta 1s here and these delta 2s are going to be particularly important in figuring out what the profile is and whether you're actually acquiring more general or specific human capital. So your training, obviously, so there's only one cost of training, which is opportunity cost. So this is my potential productivity minus how much time, times how much time I'm actually working, which if I'm not investing at all, it's just 1 minus the zeta. But if I'm investing, then it's 1 minus the total investment time. So the opportunity costs are exactly the same for either type. Okay, so this would be the flow productivity of the match under those investment levels. Now also, unlike Rasmus's paper with Nicola, you can move down. And you move down with some constant rates. Phi minus sub A, phi minus sub theta. So that's moving down to the next level below.
Is it important that the firm does not have to pay any upfront costs for the training? Training course,
well, it could affect the...
You bring somebody in,
You'd really have to go back and look at Vosmer's paper more and see what happens in there, where all the training is at the time of hiring. And then there's a specific human capital, but still no one would ever want to walk away from that. And I don't remember exactly what he's making, what assumptions he's making about commitment or whatever, right? Or whether they have to sign contracts or what have you, that I don't recall. But in this case, it's all done in flows. So there's no problem, there's not one big sunk cost or something that now somebody can hold me up later for this cost.
So there's no learning by doing here?
No.
It's all been...
If you don't invest any time, the likelihood of going up is 0. You'll move down. Now when you move down, whatever state, so remember we're just going to call I is a subscript on your general ability, J on the match ability, so you can just characterize everything in terms of IJ. So if you don't invest in either one, you're only at risk of moving down. If you move down, you may start to invest again, or you may leave the firm, depending on which one goes and where you're starting from.
So why do you want to have constant depreciation? I mean, if I'm still employed, I'm still doing my work. Why should, even if I'm not investing?
Well, part of it is just an identification problem. I'm not saying this is a unique way to parameterize this process. You could parameterize, and I've done it in other papers, you could parameterize this as just the likelihood of moving up versus down as a function of tau. That you could do. In this case, we didn't do it that way. We just made moving up only a function of tau and the other one a constant. So there's other choices you can make.
So it seems to me, I mean, I don't know what the identification argument would be, but it seems to me adding learning by doing into this would be relatively simple. Your probability of moving up would be, add some constant to this. Probability that you get for free.
Well, learning by, if you want learning by, like I said, it's not a big problem to do. Learning by doing, you just mean costless. It's just a function of being there that it goes up.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do that with this function in some way,
Yeah.
but I don't know there would that be that huge a payoff. I think that basically you could say learning by doing. Now, in these stationary models, this would always have to be stochastic learning by doing. That is, I would have some likelihood of moving up to the next level. It couldn't be deterministic function of time, or I wouldn't have stationary rules anymore. So I could put this in here and make this a function of tau a, but not that this function when tau a is 0 is 0. So if you want me to have something in there that makes it not 0, but then there's an identification issue with all this stuff. It's going to be very hard to credibly identify this. It's going to be identified off of mobility patterns and so on. So you could do that. You probably change some of the estimates if you reparameterize this in some way.
If you believe your measurement error assumptions that, let's say you perfectly measure training, anytime you see there's no training and wages go up, that would probably identify it.
It depends what you're assuming about renegotiation and so on. Okay. So if you got outside offers, I could see your wage go up without your productivity going up.
Okay.
So it'd be an assumption. But yeah, I'm not saying.
People who leave a job to unemployment,
Yeah.
how do they do at their next?
Yeah, well, that's an embarrassing part of all these models. They do a lot better than you'd expect them to do.
Well, wouldn't that be evidence kind of they've acquired?
It could be evidence that we're not allowing here that when they're in the unemployment spell, they're acquiring general training. That's possible.
You get the feature that, so Flinn and Harris has this paper on specific training, right? That even I think with frictions, when you meet an employer, you're partly compensated for, the potential growth in earnings due to specific capital in another firm. So you're giving up by taking that job.
Yeah, I mean, this is not employment contracts with tenure profiles. So I don't know if that's part of that.
No, it was just they kind of made the point that they have some frictions, but that the compensation when you hire somebody includes the foregone earning of waiting for another job, that it would include like the age earning profile that would go up even without commitment, right? Just
Well, here
because you're gonna invest.
here firms are all identical in the sense that the training technologies are all the same. So I don't know why there'd be a particular wedge there. If they had different.
Jack up the initial wages sometimes.
Possibly. I don't know. I don't know that paper. So that's that setup. So let me just go through some of the value functions. So because there are these discrete states, you don't get these nice, unique reservation wages, clearly. So we're just going to define, for example, R star of A sub I. That's the lowest index that you will reject. So you will take anything above that. So it's clearly a function of your current ability, right? So this is the match draw that you'll be willing to accept. Now there's a couple of interesting things. So this,
Everything is observed by everybody, right?
yeah, yep,
There's one thing I didn't get. So when you get unemployed,
yeah,
so you stick with the last level of ability you have,
yeah.
and it depreciates the same rate as before. It doesn't.
It doesn't. Right now it doesn't. I mean, we thought about adding it, but it gets tricky. It got a little bit tricky in terms of quitting decisions, what can go in there. So for right now, it doesn't. So at least we're honest about this. Most people, good friends of mine, don't report those problems with those moments. That they don't even use those moments to try to estimate the model. So it's a common problem. It's not unique to this particular model. We're talking about EUE transitions and the wages. The last wage you had in an employment spell and a new wage. Well, you usually don't fit those moments very well, right? Because they usually don't come down as much as you'd think they would. That could be because Moscarini says there's recall and whatever. It could be a number of reasons. In this model, it could be investing when you're out. But we haven't put that stuff in there as yet. Let me just go to, there's nothing particularly unique about so just go through what can happen when you're employed. So if you're employed at an IJ value, so what can happen? You can increase an ability, general ability. That's a function of how much you're investing. So Matt wants us to go up even if this is 0. You can do that. But right now, if it's 0, you have no chance of that happening, that event. You can increase in match quality state. That's a function of your investment time there and your current value. You could decrease in ability. You could decrease in match quality. You could get an exogenous separation. You could get a better outside offer at this particular rate, right? So that's a function of, that's a contact rate when you're employed, and that's the probability of getting an offer J plus 1 or better, okay? In which case you're going to leave.
Chris, can I just ask one modeling question? Why are the human capital, why is that discrete? Why are you not just treating it continuously? Is that a tractability issue? And then
Yeah, definitely a tractability issue.
before you said it caused some problems, but
No,
it's caused problems.
well, yeah, but it's definitely a tractability issue, because then it's more like, yeah, you can think of this as an approximation to a continuous case, but we're just dealing with it as if it's discrete. But yeah, it's problematic in that case, because we want there to be discrete jumps and moving up, right? Otherwise, you'd want to model this as a diffusion process, more Moscarini-like. You'd want to model as a diffusion process, and the process you're controlling would be a function of your investment time. So it would be a different setup. I'm more comfortable using this Poisson processes, and I just want there to be a number of finite states. It could be a huge number. It could be 1,000. There's no limit to that, just what your computer will hold. We're using, I think, in this 21 or 25 of these values, but conceptually, you could keep jacking these up so the reservation wage got the interval in which it could lie would get smaller and smaller. Okay, so now what can happen to an employed guy? So he's getting a flow. This is the flow compensation, the wage. This is the likelihood that this guy will get a better offer. Okay? This is the likelihood at which it moves up in general ability. If you move up in general ability, you may actually leave this firm. We're going to see, because the result here is going to be the reservation wage path or function is not going to be monotone. That is, reservation wages are not increasing or decreasing in your general ability level. And that's because of the nature of the production technology also we're specifying. So if you would move up in general ability, you may leave. So this is going to be the max over the value of staying or the value of going into unemployment at a higher type, A. This is what if I go up in match-specific ability, well, then I have to stay, right? Because there's only a value at the firm. So that's clear. I stay at the firm. If I leave, if I lose, if I drop down one notch in my general ability, I may quit in unemployment, or I may stay at the firm. If I leave a match ability, I also have that option, particularly that option where I may quit, may go below the reservation value for that match. Or I can be just terminated exogenously and go into this. So when we estimate the model, and this is the effective discount factor associated with this, discount rate associated with that, when we estimate the model, we'll find that about 25% of dissolutions are actually endogenous. They're not due to eta shocks. They are endogenous with the A or the theta dropping. So this is the firm. So this is all going to be cooperative. It's going to be surplus division. So this is the productivity value. This actually should have the C in it too. So this should be just A times theta with this minus that C term, the cost of capital. and this is for the firm, so if the thing goes up, there's some typos in here, but if your ability goes up, this is going to be the firm's value if your ability goes up, given that you haven't quit. You could quit if your ability goes up. This is if theta goes up, you know you're going to stay at the firm, so that's going to be the firm's value when the theta match has been augmented by 1 to the next level. This is what happens if the A declines. This is once again includes the value of the guy could be quitting, in which case the firm has value 0, which is always this outside option. And this is if the A drops, that's if the theta drops, and it goes below the reservation value so that the match is dissolved.
So it's one worker, one firm, or?
It's just constant returns to scale, so there could be any indeterminate number of workers. So there's surplus division, so what we're doing is we're just maximizing this product here with this weight alpha. And so what we're determining is it's one thing you want to do discrete because we're going to solve this by brute force. So we have like, let's say 21 values of A and 21 values of theta. We're working out by brute force what these values are in terms of the wage, investment time in A, investment time in theta. Once again, it's all cooperative. Okay, subject to our normalization. At any moment in time, you have 1 unit to divide between general and should be theta investment, and these things have to be greater than or equal to 0. So then we don't look at renegotiation here. One reason is an identification. Another reason is, Jean-Marc didn't like it when I say this, but without renegotiation, we usually find we can fit moments better than allowing for renegotiation. But in this case, clearly, like in one of my responses before, when you allow renegotiation, I can see jumps in wages. I don't know that the guy actually got an offer, and I would be attributing that maybe to a change in human capital level. So it's also to aid in identification to assume none of that. So you're always bargaining just against the value of unemployment, which is always the option you always have, irrespective of any kind of commitment issues. I can always quit unemployment at any point in time.
But I guess, coming back to what you said at the beginning, if you observe training, so you observe some human capital investment, doesn't that help you identify whether it's the firm just competing with outside offers?
Yeah, but I'd say, as you see there, we're going to be estimating a lot more training than we see reported in these data.
Right.
And I would say these things, we use them, we try to use them in fitting moments, looking at correlations and so on, covariances. But you wouldn't want to use that as a level, in our thought of what training really is, as a really good measure of actually training activity going on. Part of it is just participating in panel studies. You know, when they ask you questions about a job and you say, okay, did you get any training on that job? Oh yeah, I did. And, okay, here's another 20 questions now. And now I go to the next job and you say, did you get any training there? No. So there's lots of reasons why you think this is an underestimate of this. So we do use this stuff, but we wouldn't want to say, to be training, this has to be equal to 1.
So the claim is one can't distinguish between your human capital model and one that's a Bertrand competition.
Well, under functional form assumption of the production technology, it would give you some information, but it would give you a bunch of these false kind of moves, right, according to our model, that would be due to renegotiation. I'm not saying, we did estimate it with renegotiation, we actually did. So I'm not saying, it's not that we did worse fits, we got worse fits, just like Mullins and I in the other paper, got way worse fits and kind of ridiculous estimates of some of the primitive parameters when we allowed for renegotiation. Now, that could be because this whole model is misspecified or whatever, but so we're just ignoring that for now.
And you're on the job search?
Yeah, it's all in job search. Yeah. This is going to be, so this is just a model. In fact, you know, so just think about it. So here's the deal. The firm, because there's search frictions, right? So the competitive labor market model says where a worker gets all the surplus, says if general human capital investment, the worker has to pay for everything, right? We know we add search frictions, that's no longer true. The firm will be willing to pay for part of the training costs for general human capital because you're going to hold on to this guy for a while, right? Now we think about specific human capital. Now there's two things here. Remember, here's your productivity value right now. Say I take a job and I have a low A and a high theta. Let's say I have A is less than theta. In terms of the marginal productivity of investment, either one of these things, A would have the largest marginal product associated with it. Now, why wouldn't I? So what are the countervailing forces to that? Well, turnover decisions, because A, general human capital, is general, it has no effect on turnover decisions, right? So theta does, however. So of course, even if A was a lot less than theta, but this was still a viable match, the firm likes to invest in theta more because it locks the guy in. Because remember, to leave, you're going to have to get a theta draw that's higher than this current theta draw, right? Whereas A investment doesn't change your turnover likelihood. Theta investment does. That's part of the way. We don't estimate by maximum likelihood methods. We don't have a likelihood function. We can more rigorously pursue identification. But the idea would be this. If I see two guys with approximately the same wage levels, and I see one guy and they've been at the firm for the same amount of time, I see one guy turn over, one guy not. Ex post, if I say, what was their composition of A and theta on that job? The guy with the higher theta was the less likely to turn over. Okay, so keeping these things fixed, the product A theta fixed, the higher the theta, the less likely they are to turn over. Theta is the match capital, right? So I like it when I can lock the guy in. If I get all the way to the top of that grid, then the guy's not going to leave. Now, there's depreciation, so it may come down. It may then be worthwhile to start investing more. But I like high thetas, and the firm is more willing to invest in specific human capital than general human capital, which just means you're going to take less of a wage penalty, right, for specific human capital investment than for general human capital investment.
And with the minimum wage, you might want to give them some A in order to.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see when we get. We'll see when I get there. When is that going to be? When I. Okay, so this is about equilibrium match function and trying to estimate these things. So this was our idea. It didn't work out. So forget about this. So let's just get to the estimates right now. So this is the flow value in unemployment. This is the job offer arrival rate. Now these are high offer levels. These are in weeks. This is saying about every 5 weeks you get an offer. We're trying to fit lots of things with lots of moving pieces to it. Now I know even from my 82 paper with Heckman, we know that identifying contact rates separately from match distributions in this case is I make different functional forms of the match distribution, I get different contact rates and so on, right? So we're more interested here in what the ratios are. So, but even when you're employed, you're getting a lot of offers, right? Every 10 weeks, according to this. Is that true? I don't know. I mean, we're used to usually getting estimates of these things like, maybe every 3 months you're getting an offer here, maybe every 8 months or 9 months you're getting an offer here if you're employed. So these are much different. Because there's a bunch of things going on when we look at these, which I definitely want to get to, we look at the policy functions and what acceptable A theta pairs look like. But just here's the exogenous separation rate, so it's low about every 6 years or so. But remember, there's also endogenous separation rates, and they don't occur at trivial values. These are just like the initial conditions. That was a capital cost value. So these are the more interesting things. So these are the production technologies, which are hazard rates. So the important parameters are, this is just like TFP shift parameter. These are the exponents associated with your current state. So this is associated with A. So it means the higher the A, the harder it is to move up for any given amount of time you're investing. So A is harder. That makes a lot of sense. If you think to some extent, you produce some of this A is produced when you're in formal schooling, why should you be producing a lot when you're in the general labor market? One motivation I've neglected to give here, which is important here, when people talk about the beverage curve shifting after the recession, right? They said, oh, there's a high unemployment rate, but lots of vacancies. So one question is, why don't I take these guys and train them then, right? So if you think about it, I've got these match distributions in particular. Why don't I bring them up and make this a better match? Why am I just waiting around? So this is one of the rationales. So you can do it. It's easier to do that. So this is saying, it's restricted to be monotone, of course. This is saying that the higher the current theta level, the easier it is to get to the next level. Now this is one of the more important parameters. This is the curvature associated with a time investment. And so much more curves, like a 1/4 root of time in general ability training versus something less between square root, a cube root of the time you're investing in specific human capital. Okay, so this means, it's going to give us some patterns of training that are going to be important here. I want to get to, okay, so this is important to look at. So in light of some of those estimates, this is your worker ability, and remember, this is the acceptable match distribution. There's, like I said, about 21 values of this that we're using. So what's it showing? So for guys with low ability, they have to get a very high match value for the worker, for the firm to be able to accept employment with the firm. Now, why is that? Well, these are, especially down here, take a guy with really bad. He's got to have a very high theta. Now, why is that? Got a high theta and a low value of A. So in terms of just flow productivity, it's clearly better to invest in A. But of course, A investment doesn't change this guy's likelihood of leaving. So I'm investing in A. So why am I insisting that this be a high theta? Well, then it's very unlikely he's going to get an offer better than that. So he's locked in already. When I'm moving up in terms of this, I drop down, and like for these guys, the guy's kind of in the middle here, is the lowest reservation value in terms of matches. Well, why is that? Because I can start, they've got a decent match value, but now I can start investing. It's easier to invest and increase match-specific human capital than it is general human capital. So with these guys, they'd be doing a lot of investing. Why do these guys up here have such a high theta with a high A? Well, for one thing, because we estimated the contact rate is about every 5 weeks, right? So these guys have a high theta, which means it's cheap for them to actually move up another slot. It's easy, I should say, in terms of production technology, but it's expensive in terms of opportunity cost. So these guys are going to wait for a really good match before they bite because they're getting so many offers, essentially, right? So this is also going to explain why you can get weird patterns in terms of the depreciation in A and theta and causing people to endogenously terminate a match. Depends on your value of A and your value of theta. There's no kind of nice monotonicity relationship here, but it's an interesting relationship that's produced by the estimates of the production technologies. This just shows you the amount of time, this is out of 1 unit, the amount of time you're spending. So these guys are spending in match-specific training. So spending about 15% of the time for these guys here. It's pretty much not very dependent on your general ability level in this case. Time spent on general training. It's harder to move in general training, so people are spending less time. But these guys down here with low worker ability, just because A is small and theta is relatively high, they're the guys that are investing more in general ability, right? Because that's the basically limiting factor in that product. Wages a fraction of output. So this is important. So here, these are viable matches. And here, the worker's getting 100% of the production. And the worker could get even more than 100% of the production. This is going to be important when we consider minimum wage effects, which we don't know if we will, but if there are minimum wage effects, we know, like in any standard model, like the kinds I've estimated, if you have a constant flow productivity, whether it's due to eta, theta, whatever, the productivity of the match has to be at least as high as the minimum wage for an employment contract to begin, right? In this case, that's not true. So say I had to wait to contact a guy for a long time. There's a minimum wage. This guy's production is 8 times theta, comes in below that minimum wage. Okay, I could still hire that guy. I could have negative flow profits on that guy. Why? As long as the expected value of the whole length of this employment relationship is positive, we could be investing to get that guy's productivity up above the minimum wage, so I'd be earning a positive flow profit at that point. So the usual conditions that I've used before no longer hold when I can change A or theta. Now, of course, how much you want to change A or theta is going to depend on how far below it is, right? Because I'm investing, I'm even reducing that flow productivity further, right? Because it's only the time I'm working. So if I'm investing a lot to get that up, I'm also increasing the negative flow profit rate. So there's these kinds of trade-offs there. So just some pictures, training by years in the labor force. Now, one thing about this paper is that's kind of limiting is we're just using NLSY 97. So these are really young people. And so where all this stuff is on some transition path, so I would really like to re-estimate this using a wider age range of people. So right now you have to take this all with a grain of salt and just consider this all estimated off the beginning of the labor market career, which is where in general we'd expect to see more investment. But you can't think of really extrapolating this out to people who've been in the labor market for 25 or 30 years. So what you see is training. So this is total training by years of the market. So this would be from simulations of the model. So you're initially starting off, usually on average, over 20% of the time you're training. It's declining some, but even after 6 years, you're still up to around 17%. As I say, if we had a wider age range, this might change.
And this is aggregating across all education levels?
Yeah, yeah. And this is a fraction of time in general training. And this is the fraction of time in match-specific training. So, remember, so because of the production technologies, you're actually spending more time on average in general training, but you're getting less out of it, right? Because there was like a quartic of that as opposed to something that was more than a cubic of the time invested down here. So you're moving up less with this training. But for guys that are starting off with a reasonably high A but a really low theta, those are the guys you're training. The high school level guy, the guys with the low A end of the A distribution. Because they already got a high theta or you wouldn't have started the employment contract. So now you're investing in A for those guys, but it's really hard to move them up. We'll go through this. This is a kind of decomposition of log wages. So this is really an identity. So people talk about Mincer identity. This is a real identity. But it's just breaking down wages into something that should be pretty constant, the share of the surplus, the wage going, share of the wage in the total surplus. But these other things are decompositions by log-specific human capital. How much is due to that? Theta. How much is due to general human capital? How much is due to changes in the time, right? We saw the time investing coming down.
Why is this coming out like this? So the usual literature says 0 returns to tenure.
Zero returns to tenure?
Yeah. If you look at all the Altorgi papers, Altorgi Williams, Altorgi Shakotko, even what we've done in Germany, but forget about us, that's German data. But in any case, it's never the case that tenure trumps experience.
Remember, yeah, well, in this case, first of all, this is estimated over just the first 6 years, basically, is one part of it. We don't know whether this would catch up or what would happen here at some point. I'm not saying it's easy to identify these things, right, separately. By saying there's general human capital, specific general does not change turnover patterns, specific does. That's basically what's allowing you to identify these different production processes. So to the extent to which that's not true, we lose identification.
But you do, so your model could make predictions about returns to tenure and returns to experience, let's say.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah.
I mean, it's not exactly that.
No, first of all, we can just simulate a bunch of sample paths and estimate regressions.
So you
we could do
put
that.
To these kinds of estimates, right? You have firms in your data, and you could say, you know.
Yeah, we could do
I
that.
mean, that would be interesting. It's kind of a.
Well, we even thought about doing sort of indirect inference kind of thing and estimating more of a Mincer regression and fitting the model to that. So that's one thing we could do. Let me just you got 2 minutes just to show you what happens. And then we also estimate not allowing for A training, not allowing for theta training. And we show that you can't hit certain moments, you suffer on one side or the other, which is some kind of indirect argument that you need both to be able to explain patterns in the data. So let's just see what happens to minimum wages. So this is the minimum wage in general equilibrium. So what happens with a $15 an hour minimum wage? Well, not much. Not much. Now remember, so one thing in this stuff is that there are different values of A. Your value of A is not time invariant, it can change. But at any point in time, there are people on the low end of the A distribution. When we consider minimum wages, which we do in the other stuff, you'd want to also consider what the distributional impacts are of minimum wage rates depending on your A. So clearly, if I have low A and a high minimum wage, that means I have to have a very high value of theta, essentially, right? So this is one thing you're seeing, like here, this is just a partial equilibrium. You can see what happens to the theta values that are required to start a match when there's a minimum wage of 15. Well, they go up significantly, right? So these guys in the low end are going to have a very hard time finding employment. Some of them are going to find employment and actually be yielding negative flow profits, but there's still going to be investment going on with the hope that they're going to go up above the minimum wage in terms of productivity. So if we go back to this case, so this is general equilibrium, so the contact rates are adjusting. Job offer arrival rate. So as we go even to $25 an hour, this is why you want to tape this, so you can show. Flinn recommends $25 an hour. Ed Prescott will never speak to me again.
But this is the part because you're pooling all the education. We could target if the job offer rates varied by education, you might get a.
Yeah, you could see if you had a segmented market, you might be able to have different minimum wages. But then, since the idea of the minimum wage is really to help the least able in some way, right? They need a raise. Obama says these guys need a raise. It's just a question if they're actually going to get a raise or going to get unemployed. So in this case, you can see what's going to happen to the job, what's going to happen to the unemployment rate here. If it goes to 25 an hour, it's going to be 17%. Now, most of these are going to be the low A people, right? In other tables here, we have that broken down by A. What happens to just general ability?
Why don't you start with welfare? Welfare is declining everywhere, right?
Yeah. It's declining everywhere. And it's declining, but it's declining particularly for people with some, remember, this is not the same as A, but people with some college started off on average with higher levels of A.
So why don't you write down an optimal minimum wage?
Well, I've done that before, but you have to define what the metric is.
Welfare.
Yeah, well, I mean, there would be an optimal minimum wage, but you have to target it to a particular group, probably, right? Okay. So one of the issues here is, untargeted. Yeah, you can work out an optimal minimum wage given a particular welfare function.
Nobody ever argues for $25 minimum wage.
No, but here's, it's just to illustrate where the impact is coming.
Things happen,
No. But look, what I'm interested in more is what happens to ability, what happens to investment, right? This is the part that hasn't been empirically analyzed in a framework like this. So what we want to say is what happens to general ability, right? Taking this out to the steady state, what happens to general ability? There's a big effect. So that gets to the welfare idea. So is the welfare idea, should it involve now also steady state productivity distribution, right? So I can change values of A, I can change values of theta. It's a different exercise than when I can't change those things, right? So we're saying in this case, it is going to have long run effects. Just like in the paper with Mullins, it had long run effects to schooling decisions. In this case, it has long run effects on the amount of training people are going to get on the job. just like the classical model, but it's mediated by search frictions and ability to invest in either A or theta. So yeah, I'm not saying these are optimal, it's just to show you how much impact you're getting. For high school people, even the lowest schooling group, for $15, it's only decreasing by 1%, their training, okay? Their general training, their general ability level they end up with. But once you start moving up, you're getting really significant amounts of reductions in the training. So it's just a comparative statics exercise. It's not a policy recommendation. Okay, so I guess I'm well past out of time.
Okay, so if you want, we can keep discussion for afterwards. Since we're at the time. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.